Very healthy relationship. As you say, U.S. is Brazil's #1 trading partner. Brazil is also an important trading partner for the U.S. Among the BRICS countries, if you look at Brazil, Russia, India, China, Brazil is the second most important partner for the U.S. And the relationship is, I think, going through a very positive moment, thanks also to the context at the highest political level. As you know, President Bush was in São Paulo early this year in March, and then President Lula came to Camp David. Important agreements were signed, in particular a memorandum of understanding on biofuels, which I think is also of strategic importance. The fundamental development in the region was the coming closer together of Brazil and Argentina. Now, this took place more than 10 years ago. It was at the root of Mercosur, which also includes Paraguay and Uruguay, two smaller economies. Chile and Bolivia are associated states. Now Venezuela is applying to become a full member. And Mercosur has also developed a network of trade agreements with all the other South American countries. So Mercosur should not be seen as an end in itself. I think it's today very importantly so, a stepping stone for a wider group of South American countries coming together under the South American Community of Nations, UNASUR, as it is known. If you look at the current situation, trade has been growing very significantly, political contacts. I think you could even speak of revolutionary patterns in the way that the leaders and the private sector of all the countries in Mercosur and in South America have been dealing with each other, much more intense, much closer than any previous time in our history, perhaps only comparable to what takes place, for example, in the European Union, where a president from one country will travel to his neighboring country and have dinner with his counterpart without too much preparation ahead of time, many phone calls, many conference calls. And we see this also as a path towards better governance, more stability, more democratic regimes in the region. The free trade area of the Americas is, I think, maybe undergoing some reconsideration. And this is not only due to a Brazilian hesitation regarding the project. I think both the U.S. and Brazil have been investing more energy in the WTO trade rounds, which are strategic importance for the multilateral trading system and for increasing trade. And perhaps there will be some reconsideration of how we can establish a framework for closer trade and economic ties bilaterally and regionally. So I would say that for the time being, the free trade area of the Americas is not really on the agenda. Brazil has gone from a situation where we used to export around 60 billion in 2002 to one where we are exporting 150 billion now, 2006, 2007. So I think if you exclude the oil exporting countries of the world, this is one of the most impressive performances outside of China's, of course, performance in trade worldwide. And a great deal of what has been accomplished is thanks to diversification of markets. Not only the more intense relationship with our neighbors in South America and also preservation and enhancement of good relations with traditional partners such as the U.S., but to a great extent new markets in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. The agreement on biofuels, of course, has been a landmark. As I mentioned, I think it is of strategic importance. It brings together the world's two largest producers of ethanol and countries that are investing heavily also into the development of new forms of renewable sources of energy. There are three windows in the agreement, so to speak: a bilateral cooperation window, a trilateral cooperation aspect, which involves Brazil and the U.S. cooperating in third countries. 4 countries have been identified already as the initial beneficiaries of this cooperation: Haiti, Dominican Republic, El Salvador, and the island nation of St. Kitts in the Caribbean. We hope that this will be a successful first tier of cooperation, and that maybe it will lead us to working together in Africa and Asia in the future. And on a more world-wide scale, Brazil and the U.S. have been at the forefront of efforts to develop common standards and codes for ethanol and biofuels worldwide. This is an effort that also involves the European Union, China, India, and South Africa. And we hope that this will allow us to transform ethanol, in particular, into a world commodity so that it can be traded as oil is traded today in world markets in the very near future. I think in the case of Brazil, we are satisfied with the level of attention Brazil is receiving. As I mentioned, there have been high-level meetings between the 2 presidents. There is a very good working relationship between our foreign minister, Mr. Amorim, and his 2 counterparts in the U.S. government, Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice and USTR Susan Schwab. On other issues, government contacts have been proceeding in a very satisfactory way. So we welcome in particular what seems to us as a greater sensibility on the part of the U.S. government for the social agenda in Latin America. This has been highlighted in President Bush's latest trip to the region in particular, where he, I think, made a particular effort to demonstrate that the U.S. Was appreciating the efforts of reducing inequality, combating poverty and hunger in the region. There are many positive things to be said about the region at this moment. The region is growing economically. It's found a greater degree of stability than in recent times. In Brazil, in particular, the economic news is very favorable. We've been growing at around 4% for the past 4 years. Trade has increased greatly, as I mentioned to you. International reserves are at 160 billion. Inflation is down. We haven't had such good news in a long, long time. But also politically, if you look at South America, all governments are democratically elected. All governments have been placing strong emphasis on social issues. And this is of fundamental importance in a region that is marked, as you know, by great social inequalities and challenges. So to the degree that there's an understanding of this process and an appreciation of what governments are attempting to accomplish, I think we are very satisfied with the attention that is being put by the United States on South America in particular. If you look at the past decades in Brazil, we have had decades of no or very little growth that didn't do very much for reducing inequality, such as the 80s. We have decades like the 70s when we had very high levels of economic growth, but this with exacerbation of inequality and concentration of income in the hands of the more wealthy. And what we have today in Brazil is, I think, a very positive combination of growth with reduction of inequality. The same, I think, is happening in Chile. In Brazil, in particular, the Lula government has been very successful at implementing certain programs, such as the Bolsa Familia, which is a grant that is handed out to families that are under the poverty line, earn less than $1 a day. And this has reduced the number of people in that category substantively. And we hope that by the end of his second term, President Lula will have made further progress. It's not only very important socially, but I think it's healthy for the economy. It's healthy for our internal political development. It promotes better citizenship and a better quality of democracy. So this is not only myself who is saying, I think the World Bank, other international observers have recognized that the progress made in Brazil is significant, and some of our experiences might be replicated elsewhere. Brazil and the U.S. have worked together already in trying to deal with what is a very polarized situation in the Venezuelan society. We were both members of the so-called Group of Friends for Venezuela that was established in 2003. And this was a group that included not necessarily friends of President Hugo Chavez, but friends of the country that included Spain's Aznar, for example, at the time a government that was highly critical of President Chavez. And it was thanks to this group, which was a Brazilian initiative, I think it's fair to recognize, that an initial moment of tension and instability in Venezuela was overcome through the recall referendum. You may recall that this took place, which reinstated the electoral preference in Venezuela for Mr. Chavez. Subsequently, he was reelected, also with a wide margin. So I think we have to be very respectful of the Venezuelan electorate in first place, while recognizing at the same time that it is a polarized society. The opposition in Venezuela has tried to stage a coup d'etat in April of 2002. So to a certain degree, it has demonstrated that it was not necessarily fully democratic or had the strongest democratic credentials. But we are encouraged to see that these tensions have diminished, and we hope that through closer integration, closer economic integration and cooperation with Brazil, with other countries in the region, we will reach more harmonious levels of governance in all of South America.